What's going on, guys? Satsuki the Savage here, and today I'm going to be doing a video on John from unOrdinary. Now, I wanted to do a video on this character in particular because he is a very, very controversial character, all right? Some people think he's the best shit ever. Some people think he's the worst ever, right? For example, I have Darius, my boy Darius, who will go on my videos standing John. He will spam the gold emojis. You would think he got an S on his chest the way this man be caping for John, all right? And in contrast, you have Pierce Jupiter, now Solo Warrior, who, the way he talks about John, you would think John is anime Hitler, all right? So very mixed thoughts on John, all right? And I also got inspired by Nya D Hemmingz video on Arlo. So if you're watching this, you should definitely check that out. That was a really good video. So yeah, man, enough of the formalities. Let's just get right into the video. Good old John from the days of the prologue is your average high school student. Everything about John screams run of the mill. From his hair color, to his height, to his grades, to his name, John doesn't have anything about him that strikes you as odd. That is, until you look at him closer. John being a cripple in of itself is a rarity, as he's in a school that hosts the strongest students in the region. Then you see John have the capability to fight off mid-tiers, seemingly with just hand-to-hand combat. And then you see John is the son of the infamous John Doe, the man who wrote the unOrdinary book, which had authorities in a panic. Down the line, you start to realize that there are two different Johns. One is a surface level John that puts up a facade as a naive and weak individual, color-coded by his white speech bubble. The other John is one that takes on a serious tone and deserts the image of frailty, marked by his black speech bubble. These two extreme personalities had to coexist within John, so my job here today is to talk about them both. Hair Gel John, by all accounts, is a decent dude. He doesn't make any ripples, and for the most part, he keeps to himself. However, he doesn't like the hierarchy in which might equals right. Therefore, he will stand up for others in situations where he feels they are being wronged. Examples include John intervening between Terrence and Gavin and helping out the mall vendor guy against Levani. You can define John as brave or foolish, depending on which angle you look at it. Either way, you can surmise that John isn't your typical cripple. As a low tier, and especially as a cripple, the ideal way to strive in Wellston is to keep your head down, try to avoid bumping into others, and not fight. John, however, does not heed the unspoken rules of cripples. He will walk the open hallways whistling, casually bumping into the King Arlo while getting into fights practically every day. Furthermore, John's view on the world is quite unusual. John is one of the few people that doesn't look at vigilantes in a negative light and resents the public attitude towards heroic behavior. This is another reason why John holds the unOrdinary book in high regard. He appreciates the powerful protagonist in a story that will still listen to others weaker than himself, in direct contrast with what happens in reality. John even goes as far as to say he would join the vigilantes if he was quote-unquote qualified for it. With John's unOrdinary behavior, it's no wonder that he doesn't have a lot of friends. In fact, the only two people he has in his phone contacts is his dad William and Sera. This loneliness is probably the reason why John doesn't show Sera certain sides of his personality, as he doesn't want to lose his last friend. The silver lining in that, though, is that Sera and John have a very strong bond. Not only that, but Sera has been positively influenced by John. He is the person that gave her courage in her darkest of times. Think about when Sera lost her powers and couldn't cope with it. The thought of a cripple like John persevering despite his lack of ability was key in her moving forward. However, what Sera didn't know at the time was that the underdog she saw as inspiration was only a portion of John. Unjailed hair, black speech bubbles, fierce eyes. These are the signs that you are dealing with the other half of John. With this John, you have a complete shift with his beliefs. John now shuns the ideals in the unOrdinary book, and even under a lie detector, John says the thought of becoming a superhero never crossed his mind, a different tune he sang in front of Sera. This John is also more blunt and doesn't bite his tongue despite how his words may come across. Expect this John to appear during fits of rage. His tendencies include profanity-laced yelling and violent outbursts. In addition, John tends to relinquish the veil of him being powerless, so he's willing to fight to the best of his ability. John in this state is merciless, as his signature style in fights is to brutalize his opponents even after he's clearly overpowered them. I would describe John as unhinged when he becomes like this, but the most dangerous you'll see John is when he decides to put a mask on. John disguised as Tuesday and Joker allows him to act on his urges without consequence. In Sigmund Freud's model of the mind, he proposed that 3 agents of the psyche creates our reality. Those components are id, superego, and the ego. Basically, id is our raw instinctual desires, the superego is the moral compass, and the ego is what we project onto the real world. It compromises between the id and the superego. When John is in the Joker persona, he forsakes the superego and allows the id to take over. This is where we see he acts the most brutal, not holding anything back in his fights. But why does John act on his impulses only as Joker, when essentially all he's doing differently is wearing a mask? With John posing as Joker, he can shed his cripple role, be free from the shackles of expectation, acting on his own whims. The other question then becomes, why would the expectations of others be relevant to John? While other people's perspective on John may seem like a trivial issue, it's a problem that has plagued a lot of our key characters. Sera in the past was the perfect model student, largely because everyone thought she should be that way. But once those expectations were drowned out, Sera had a drastic change from her old self. The same dilemma can be applied to the rest of the high rankers who at times feel suffocated by the pressure to live up to their respective roles. Whether it be Blight being the Jack, Eason being the head of the press, or Arlo being the king, they are all affected by responsibility piled onto them by authority, their peers, and themselves. Also, in unOrdinary, unlike other series, we are dealing with high school characters that talk and act as such. I say that to bring home the fact that these characters aren't at the age of peak maturity. Thus, they are more vulnerable to peer pressure, John included. Arlo said it best, John wants all the authority of a king without any of the burden. This attempt to escape obligation is part of why John wouldn't make a good king, but it's mainly because of his past. John experienced the miracle of a lifetime. He went from being virtually a cripple to gaining the upper hand on pretty much everyone, sitting at a god tier level of a 7.0 in his second year of high school. The combination of John's sudden power surge and his bottled up rage lends into why John has his dark personality. On one side, John hates the hierarchy and most people under his tutelage because it was a system he suffered from for a long time. On the other side, John has shown to be condescending to low tiers, most notably Evie and Roland. I can't say exactly why John would look at low tiers in such a patronizing manner, but my guess is that he finds their submission to oppression sickening. Before his rise to power, maybe John would resonate with the less fortunate. However, the current John is stuck in limbo. He has too much baggage to be associated with the high tiers, but too much power to relate to the low tiers anymore. John is unable to be in a position of leadership, at least effectively, due to his inability to identify with one side or the other, which also lends into his wild card moniker. Add in guilt from hurting his friends and paranoia from Claire's betrayal, and then you have someone who could never truly fit in the structure of society, someone who was never fit to rule. When we see these two contradictory sides to John's character, we often say, this John is the real John. I think it's important to not judge someone in their lowest of lows, because in extreme situations, you may see someone go through a state instead of a concrete personality change. I believe our true selves is what we display on a consistent basis in normal circumstances. I bring that point up only to say that both of John's personalities should be taken into account when determining what is authentic about him. The key hypothetical question is, how would John act if the hierarchy system wasn't in effect? And with John beating the Royals and proclaiming that the hierarchy is removed, we may get an answer to that soon. Given my own opinion on John, I acknowledge that he is a great character, but I don't favor him for many reasons. For one, I think John is extremely hypocritical. John condemns high tiers like Arlo and Remy for not making a change to Wellston and accuses them of negligence on the part of not protecting low tiers, but John does the same. Sure, John has helped weak people before, but you won't see him blowing his cover just to save someone. John is just as guilty as the high rankers he despises. He was content with the status quo so long as he wasn't bothered. Secondly, I can't get on board with John's fight fire with an even bigger fire mentality. When John beats up people that bullied him, I get it. When John beats up people like Junie, I get it. They probably had it coming, but that doesn't excuse the fact that John goes over the edge. John gets in this tunnel vision state and the wrong people could get burned. The biggest example is Remy being targeted by John despite her wholeheartedly wanting harmony for low tiers, mid tiers, and high tiers all alike. Lastly, my biggest issue with John is his decision making and refusal to change. John acts as a cripple to avoid any waves, but his real problem is his mentality. And what exactly is he doing to solve that? John is not naive. He knows the world is corrupt and that people will salivate at the opportunity to exploit one's weakness. Yet, he hides his powers and enrolls in Wellston of all schools. This type of decision making is why John is put in undesirable situations, so I'm never surprised by the consequences. Just to clarify though, in no way, shape, or form do I justify the actions of the people that torment John and others. My stance is simply that John has two choices: go with the flow or step up to make changes. And with John initially choosing the former, he put himself behind the 8 ball time and time again. And while John acknowledging the faults of the world and even his own faults is cool, I need to see another step to amend these flaws. I think once John is driven into a corner, he will change for the better. But before then, he has to hit rock bottom to truly challenge himself by facing his issues head on. Eventually though, I think John will parallel to the protagonist in unOrdinary, given that these changes occur. I said it in the beginning, but I'll say it again. What makes John so intriguing is that he is a polarizing character. John is unlike other MCs in that his actions are brought in a negative light, having us, the readers, question his morality. This is where I have to give Uru-chan major props. She wrote a character like John who evokes emotion from you, for better or for worse, and to top that, he's the main character. Having side characters like John isn't too risky because they aren't the primary focus of the story, but with John, we are forced to follow him into the depths of hell, which could turn some people off. I have a subscriber, and he'll know who he is, that calls out John in all my unOrdinary videos and expresses how John makes it a struggle for him to continue reading. Having a MC who can be this unlikable is a role that many writers avoid, but Uru-chan is the exception, so I appreciate her and I appreciate John. Alright guys, that pretty much wraps up the video. I want to know your thoughts on John. If he's your favorite character, let me know. If you think he's the worst character in unOrdinary, also let me know. Let me know who's your favorite character, period. But guys, that is it for me. I am Satsuki the Savage. Like, comment, subscribe. I am out. And I want justice for Serafina. Now I'm out. I ain't playing.
Am I dying to live, or am I living to die? Living a lie, with my head stressed out, see I'm stressed out.